Okay, moving on. So now what we're going to want to do is transition out of the traditional 5.1 and move into this notion of spatial audio. So spatial audio is going to allow us to work in 3D. So the sound can move anywhere. But even cooler is it's not baked into the speaker output. So in other words, when you have a 5.1, you have all the content created for each of the speakers. Like in other words, each of the tracks is baked in there. So what it is what it is. It's stuck. But as we move into more of these like VR type type or XR or AR type situations where if you hold up your phone you can move it around, what we want is we want our audioscape to stay fixed in the same way that if you think about you take 360 video. So if you take 360 video and you have a tree in front of you and you take your phone, or if you're in VR and you turn away, it tracks your head, and what it's doing is it's actually in the video, it's rotating it opposite so that it looks like you're actually moving your head in the world, but the tree is actually staying in the same spot. Well, we want to be able to do the same thing with audio, and that's a little bit. I won't say it's trickier, but it's certainly a challenge. So if we want to create that, what we have to do is we have to create essentially the equivalent of, say, a 360 video, but 360 audio. Like a 360 video is going to be all the video capped around it. We want to capture the raw audio in spatial format so that we can rotate that and move it around and manipulate it. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some special tools to work in this, and there's a lot of different kind of tools that are out there, but we're going to look at some of the really popular one, and especially ones that are free. So you can certainly do this with Nuendo, and that was the plan with the earlier rest of this part of the semester, or I guess the rest of the semester was to be using Nuendo for this sort of thing. But since we're moving into Reaper, let's find some free tools, let's make this thing work, and let's do some cool stuff. So the tools we're going to use, I guess also I need to also mention that what we're going to do is, and as I mentioned in the last PowerPoint thing that I did last time, was that you got to remember that Amazonics is an intermediate format. So when we create this video, it'd be like this 360 audio wave field. It's an intermediate format. You can't listen to that directly. Well, you can listen to it, but it's not going to be spatial audio. So what we have to do is we have to encode this to spatial audio, and then we decode it on playback. So we can play this back to a spatial array, to a 5.1 system, or to even headphones. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to focus on this idea of headphones, but I'll try and pause and look at it how we can use this intermediate format in other ways. So let's work with let's continue on. Well, actually, we'll use this session to continue on with it. But let's take a look at the tools that we need to use for this. So in Firefox, I'm just going to pull up FB360. So if you just Google FB360 Spatial Audio Workstation FB360 Video. So this company here was actually a Scottish group this is actually somebody's senior thesis. And they were a company called Two Big Ears. And so there's still, like, you'll still see things on this called Two Big Ears. But when Facebook got into the VR game, and because they own Oculus, and so when Facebook was getting into the VR game, they started scooping up all these companies that were doing VR tech. And one of the biggest challenges up to that point was there was no real good workflow for working in spatial audio. There's no tools and panners and everything. So Two Big Ears took on the challenge of creating an ecosystem and a workflow using traditional DAWs, because normally at that point in time, traditional DAWs like Pro Tools and stuff, they weren't really able to do this. They didn't have 360 panners and all that stuff built in. So Two Big Ears came on and they tried to come up with these workflows so you could work in your own audio workstations, their normal tools. Yet, granted, you have to do some weird routing, but you could set up and work with normal tools. And they did a pretty good job with it, and then they were quickly scooped up by Facebook, and now it's called FB360. And so FB360, I won't say it's the standard, but it certainly is a very good workflow for creating content for this, because they make it so that you can create stuff for YouTube and for Facebook, with including video all the way through. So this is a really good system for creating 360 content. So that's what we're going to be working on with today. So if you want to get this thing, go ahead and download it for your system. The only thing you really need, these are all older ones right here. I'm working on 3.3. So if you're working on Pro Tools, you can use AAX. I'm working on Reaper, so we're going to use VSTs. And you can work on Mac or Windows. Oh, it looks like, yeah, it looks like they only have the VST for Windows in 3.31. Not that it really makes that much difference. I don't know what the difference between any of these would be, but whatever workstation you or whatever you've got, it's going to be fine. They're all 3-ish, so I don't believe there'll be any big differences between any of these. But I'm just working on, just because I happen to download it. This one right here. That's if you're on Mac, that's what you're going to use. If you're on Windows, let's find the highest Windows up one. Windows VST would be 3.31. This one right here. And that would work fine too. Okay. Actually, this is kind of interesting. Let's just watch the video. Go forward.
As parents, it's important that our kids have a chance to experience a place like this, and we want to make sure all of America's kids have
Wait for it to buffer a little bit.
this opportunity. That's why last year we mountains and the waterfalls and forests of Yosemite. When we landed, we looked up at Half Dome, lit by the setting sun and a clear blue sky.
All right. Well, it's not working very well. My internet's really slow right now for whatever reason. There's a couple takeaways there though, and I've seen that video before, but it's been a while. Is that they've got all these sound effects, people, and you're looking around, and you want to actually add sound elements that match what you see in the 360 video. So that helicopter, if you watch it closely, it sounds terrible. It just doesn't work very well for it. I guess I won't say it sounds terrible. It just doesn't match. If you know what you're looking for, it doesn't look quite right. But you also hear that there's some music, and there was actually Obama speaking. And if you turn around, you'll notice that the music and Obama stay in the same spot. But the people walking, the helicopters, the river, and all those different elements, they stay fixed. So we have actually two separate audio streams happening at the same time. One of them is going to be what we call headlocked, and the other one's going to be like head tracked, or we could say world locked. So that's the way I've always called them, as headlocked and world locked. So world means that the world is fixed and the sound effects is out there. And so if I move my head, it stays fixed. But if it's headlocked, if I have music playing through here and I have music playing, the music and narration are going to stay with my head, because I don't want it to, except for in certain specific cases, I don't want the music to sound like they're virtual speakers coming from over somewhere far away. And if I move my head around, I want the music to add emotional, an underbelly to your video right there. If we're working in music just in general, like we will be today, it's up to you, however you want to do stuff. But, you may have it something like you want the lead singer or the melody line to be locked to the head, so it stays where it is. But you might have other elements moving around, and those are actually stay fixed. Well, we're not gonna be using head tracking, so we don't really have the means to hold stuff fixed. But we'll work our way through it. So, if you haven't done that yet, go ahead and download this, get it installed, and go ahead and poke around with it for a little bit. Start just pulling up the plugins and experiment with it for a bit. But we're gonna constrain our discussion and keep it simple for right now, and then we're gonna use the other tools as we go along further. So let's move on and let's take a look at how we're gonna work this. So the first thing we need to do is we need a new track. So I'm gonna keep my old track right there. I'm not gonna use it, but we'll keep it just for now. And when we work in Ambisonics, if you recall during our last lecture, that we can use Ambisonics in a number of different orders. So first order, second order, third order. Those are going to be the main ones that we use these days. So first order is going to require 4 audio tracks. Second order is going to require 9 audio tracks, and third order is going to require 16 audio tracks. So we can work on any one of these that we want to. I'm going to go ahead and work out the highest order possible and just go with it. So what I need to do is on my routing on this one right here, let's look at our routing. And I want this to be 16 tracks wide if we're going to work in third order Ambisonics, which means also that my master track also needs to be in third order. Actually, I'm just going to move this down here and get rid of this one. Stretch that out a little bit. And let's make our master, let's move that up to 16 tracks as well. So now we have a 16 track channel sending 16 tracks over to the master, and then the master is going to work with our setup. And so I want to get rid of this. Oops, I already have an old. Let's get rid of this one. We don't want this one anymore. So Let's just delete this for now. Delete both of these for now. And if we just press play, we see we have 2 channels here, which is left and right, which is corresponding to left and right. Now, remember, what we're going to do is we're going to convert this into an intermediate format of an ambisonic stream. So in other words, instead of those tracks becoming audio tracks, they're going to be our spherical harmonics. They're going to be related to one another to determine how loud and the phase relationship between those will determine the directivity of this thing. So let's look at our first tool that we're going to use, and that's going to be our this is under VST3. On each of your tracks that you want to work with, you're going to use this Spatializer AmbiX. So you see there's the 2 big ears business I was talking about. So Spatializer. So that's going to turn it from basically a mono track or stereo track into a spatial track. And what we have here, I'm going to pull this out. What we have here is essentially our 3D panner. And actually, if you look closely in that in the panner, the Repanner or Reaper or whatever that was, that surround panner for Reaper, it actually has a Z in there as well. So you can move stuff up and down in the X, Y, and Z, but it's not encoding it to ambisonics. So this has the ability to drop in a video file here. So if you wanted to, if you're trying to sync this up to say, like that last video we were kind of watching, if you have a helicopter landing and you go, okay, I need to know where this helicopter is going to land. Basically, you want your video here to match what you see down here. So if I have an elephant walking across and I want to record an overdub an elephant that I make it sound like it's moving across there, I can use that. So if you happen to have a spatial recording of it, that's great. You don't really need to do any of this stuff. But this is if we want to pan in 3D and move stuff around. So we're not going to use this section right here. In fact, I don't even know if I can turn this thing off. I wonder if I could just get rid of that whole section. Doesn't seem like it. Okay. But what we want to do, so we're just going to leave that blank for now. We will start looking at some video coming down the pipe. So I've got, here's my object right here. And you can see that as I pan this thing around, we can look at our azimuth. When we're talking about in ambisonics, we define something in 360 as azimuth, which is its angle, elevation, which is its height, and distance is how far away it's going to be. So we can pan this thing through here so we can see our distance. So they've got their distance so from 4 meters down to 1 meter. You can scale this up, I think, somewhere. I don't know if you have, oh yeah, you can make it. There's got to be a way you can make this thing bigger, but we'll call 4 meters, which, would be about, what, 13, 14 feet, something like that, 12 feet. It's not quite 12 feet. It's going to be a little bit bigger than 12 feet, but so we'll say 13 feet. So this would be like if you're working with things that are 13 feet. If it's beyond 13 feet, what I would say is you don't just move, you just pull stuff farther away and just make it quieter, and that would just work fine. So if we want to look at this thing in 3D, we can turn sideways right here, and now we can also control it from here. So if I want to spin this thing around, and I can do the elevation, so we can see it moving over the top or underneath, so you can actually have the sound move underneath you. And then distance is how far it moves away quickly. Let's get that back. Turn that off. Let's go distance back down here. So I guess you could go much farther if you just type it in right there. But honestly, if I was going outside of this range right here, I would actually just turn the volume down. So automate it so the volume goes down to give you that sense of distance. Then the spread. I'm not really sure what spread is in there. Yeah, here's our min and max distance. Pretty far. Directionality is pretty interesting. So depending on what source you're working on here. So say you're working with a trumpet player, and like you have some 360 content of a trumpet player or VR content of a trumpet player, that what you're going to want to do is that trumpet, when you're playing a trumpet, is very directional in terms of sound. So if we turn the directionality on here, we can actually adjust the direction in which the sound is going to be pushing out of that thing. So if I have a trumpet player, like a marching band go by me, you'll hear that it'll get quieter and more muffled as it goes past me on here. And you can adjust the amount of the effect angle that it's doing right there. So pretty useful. So if you're out recording and you have 360 video or an animation, a 360 animation of this thing, and you have a marching band going by you, or a car, a car is probably a bad example. Something that has very directional sound source, this would work pretty well. I'll turn that off for now. I don't want to use it. We can experiment with that in a minute. So Doppler is pretty neat though. So Doppler, if it's coming towards you, it's going to be pitched up, and if it moves past you, it's going to be pitched down. You can say the amount of it. So if you're recording like a car driving by, and you have a car go, you want it to go, meow. So you can use this with some automation. As it goes past you, it's gonna include that Doppler level, that pitch shift in there, which if you didn't have this effect right here, you'd have to manually pitch something up as it goes past and pitch it down, like a car, like if you're doing a car racing game or something like that. You'd have to manually do that, and that'd be really difficult. And then the last thing we have here is this room. So the room is huge. When you work with binaural spatialization and you're working with this head-related transfer functions, one of the key things that we work with in our hearing is we use reflections to actually create cues, audio cues. We talked about it early in the semester, but when those cues are short enough together, we integrate them into one sound, and we have the Haas effect and the precedence effect, but it still is pulled into. And so we use those reflections as cues as to where something is localized. So if you add this in here, it works really well to localize where something is coming from in 3D. But it doesn't make sense because it does add a little bit of reverb in there. And so, but that little bit of like reverby type reflections, they give you strong oral cues. But if you're like in that video we're looking at, if you're outside, that you don't want to use this there because it's not going to work. And in true form, you can't localize stuff outside as well as you can in a not a highly reflective room, but in a somewhat reverberant room, you can actually localize stuff. Okay, so what this is going to do, and because I created this with 16 channels wide, it knows it's going to create a third order ambisonic feed. And also, if you look down in the lower left hand corner, it's doing AmbiX, which is the extensible format of Ambi. It's basically the channel format, and it has to do with the weighting itself. If we want to look at this a little bit closer, like it might make sense to, where's the documentation? Does I have it? Oh, yeah. So if I go to it's actually pretty interesting. We should look at it. And I encourage you to do this too. So under applications, at least on Mac, we have our, there's going to be an FB360 folder. Where is it? And inside of here, we have our workstation guide here. So this is really good. It goes through and explains a lot of things. Hey, look at this. You guys remember that little FFmpeg business? If you want to convert stuff so that it works inside of this, you need to use FFmpeg to control this thing. So it's really good. And in fact, what they do is they show you how to work with Pro Tools, Nuendo, and Reaper workstation settings here. So these are kind of the big three that you can work with this stuff with. So it does work with Pro Tools. And so this is, if I were to work in Pro Tools, this would be my go-to workflow. But we're going to work with Reaper, which is, I think, just as good. Cool. Let's take a look at what's going to happen here. So if I press play, I have the audio on there. Look what's going on down here. We see that it's kicking out a bunch of audio. What's going on here? This should match that. I don't know why this isn't working quite right. Oh, maybe it's just because it has the numbers in the middle. I don't know. That's strange. Did I mess that up? 16. Okay, maybe it's just cutting them up as 8 on the left and 8 on the right there. It's a little strange right there, but yeah, I think that's the case. It looks like it's just splitting those apart right there. But we have 16 tracks here, 16 tracks over here. And now you can hear that it actually is playing it, and as I move this around. So if I move the faders, move it straight behind me, and let's move it straight in front of me. Move elevation around. See, things are changing, and as we move the distance, it's quieter. But what's happening here is in the headphones, we're only listening to tracks 1 and 2. So out of that whole thing that we saw, all these things going right here, I'm only picking up on these ones right here of tracks 1 and 2 from my left ear and my right ear. And remember, it's critical that you remember that these are not audio tracks. They're spatialized, combined. They're the spherical harmonics, which include the amplitude and the phase. When summed together, will create the 3D effect. So even though we can listen to these, they're not actual like audio tracks. They're spatial tracks. So what we need to do is we need to decode this into something that we can actually hear. At this point, though, if you were to create, and you could output that mix as a spatial track, you could put it into decoder, any kind of decoder, and it will work, including the one we were listening to before, the binaural decoder. Well, no, that one doesn't do spatial. I don't think so. That was just doing remapping. But if we go in here and we look at the what is it? Converter. So what it's going to do is it's saying, what am I listening for here? So I'm sending you B format, AmbiX third order, which indeed is the case, but these are what it can take in. It can take B format second order or spatial audio 8-channel. So I'm surprised it can't do first order, but we're going to stick with third order right now because I'm using all 16 tracks. So second order versus third order, it's going to be good, but it's not going to be quite as localization. So you won't be able to hear quite where that's coming from. And just like with that other Sparta one, we can also adjust the way we're looking right here. If I had head tracking on, it would actually adjust this for me and it can actually work on this. So outputting, it's going to convert this thing so I can adjust the whole entire world. I can rotate the world. So if for whatever reason the camera's here, but the recorder or your image is off this way, you need to rotate the entire mix so that it's actually in line with the video. That's how you would do something like that. And then what we want to go out here, so we can go out to first order, second order, third order, and so we want to go to binaural so we can actually hear this thing. So I'm going to press play and let's pan this thing around. So at this point, this is the decoder and the other one is the encoder. So let's go through and let's see if this thing works. So let's go to 0. So right now it's on a flat plane. That one feels pretty realistic. It feels like it's higher up to me. Does that feel like it's behind you? Feels like it's kind of a higher to me. So let's raise it up. Let's add some elevation to it. 30 degrees. So now it's going to be spinning around up here. Oops. So it's going to be spinning around above me if we want to. Oops. That's not what I meant to do. Let's raise it up. Yeah, it feels pretty good. And that's just using, the generic decoder right there. So what they're doing, like I said before, they're using their own binaural algorithm to make it sound like it's coming from somewhere else. There's actually some other ones out there that we should look at as well. Actually, let's do it right now. Well, actually, we'll come back. We're going to use some other tools later. We're going to dig back deeper into the Sparta stuff, and also there's a system called Deer VR. We'll look at Deer VR later, and I'm actually going to have a guest speaker come in and talk about that one. So at this point, though, if I were to add a lot of different multiple tracks in there, I could start panning these things around. And in fact, if I want to automate these things, we can certainly do that as well. So you see with the FB360, it has a lot of tools here. So, but what we care about right here is just azimuth, elevation, and distance. So if I just turn on those three and arm those, and if I wanted to record I can record this. So let's shrink this track up a little bit. So here are, oh man. Come here. Shrink up our automation. There we go. So we can see our azimuth, elevation, and distance. Probably hard to read on your screen, but if I want to record this, of course you can draw it in, but I think this is one of those things where it might be a little bit easier to record it. So if I want to record this, right click on these. So I want this to be touch. So it's going to record whatever I do there. If you haven't had post yet, this is automation. These are the different automation modes right here. Touch, latch, and write. But what I want to do is just do a touch. So it's going to record anything I touch and leave it there. So I'm just going to go ahead and press. Let's go back over here. Actually, let's go home. Let's go to the beginning. Press play and we'll do some recording. Cool. So I hit, what did I hit there? Oh yeah, because if you go down here, it cycles up to here. So this is my azimuth. So you can see it rotating around. This is my distance. So I'm not really going that far on the extremes. And then in my elevation, I didn't change at all. But if I watch it and I want to go tweak this thing, pretty cool. At least I think it is. So that is essentially how you set up a 360 using the FB360 stuff. I'm going to leave it there for right now, but because we're going to come back and we're going to talk a lot more about the deeper workflow. So adding lots more multiple tracks, we're going to add some video in there, and then how we actually kick out a dual. There's going to be essentially two mixes going on at the same time. One of them is going to be the stereo version of this, and one of them is going to be the spatialized version of this thing. And so then we'll talk about how we combine those back in so that you can actually play this thing up on Facebook or on YouTube. Using the encoder, like a cross transcoder thing, so that it actually will work on Facebook and YouTube for you. But I think for right now, that's pretty heavy. And so I want you to experiment and turn on and experiment with using the Facebook 360 tools and creating just a basic mix in 360. It's really fun. Like once you kind of get the hang of it, it's a kick in the pants. So good luck with that. I'll catch you guys later.